Hi, my name's Lacey Sheldon, and I'm here at McIntosh Memorial Library. Thanks for joining us today. Today's presentation is coming from Miss Veronica Kleiber, who is a volunteer at the Vernon Historical Society in Viroqua, and she also has a degree in public history. What she has assembled for us today is a presentation on the historical winter storms of Vernon County. Veronica, thank you so much for being here today to let us all know about our local history. I'll go ahead, Veronica, and let you start with your presentation whenever you're ready.
Okay, hello everyone. We're going to talk about some historic storms today. The first storm I want to tell you about is the winter of deep snow, 1856 to 1857. W. Dunlap was the undersheriff of Vernon County in 1856. He provided to the broadcaster a letter that had been sent to him by his friend, Mr. Munson. Mr. Munson was a stagecoach driver, and he recounts a trip he took in the winter of 1856. And in Mr. Munson's own words, "I thought it might be that your readers would like to read a few lines about the winter of 1956, the time of the deep snow of 4 feet on the level. I was driving stagecoach for Lincoln and Henrik between Viroqua and La Crosse and carrying the mail for Uncle Sam. There was no such traveling on the roads as there is nowadays. We always had to break out our own roads. I went to La Crosse on my regular trip with the mail and 7 passengers. It snowed some that day and night, and the wind blew quite a gale and quite cold. When I got up the next morning, it was still snowing, blowing, and drifting. I started for Viroqua on my return trip with 4 sacks of mail and 1 passenger. The team worrying their way through the snow and the storm the way they could till we got to Mr. Olson's at Coon Valley. There we stopped and got dinner and then started on our way, rejoicing that we could be going. Those days we had to come by the way of Coon Valley, and as we journeyed along through the wilderness of scrub oak and brush, the wind and the snow went down through the brush at the rate of 40 to 50 miles an hour. It was getting then about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I said to the gentleman from Maine, "How would you like to sleep down there all night?" He said he wouldn't do it for anything in the world. We kept plowing our way through the storm and snow until after dark. We got into the O.F. Mead Lane, now owned by John Norris. There we got snowbound, and Mr. Mead came and helped dig out our horses. He wanted us to stay the night, saying we could not find our way and would get lost. But I told him we could find our way all right, and turned back to go through the field. I might have known better, for it snowed and blowed and I couldn't see a thing. We got as far as what is now called the Linman Farm, but there we were blocked and could not tell which way to go, being all turned around. The horses were tired out, and we unhooked them and tied them to the sled, feeding them hay and oats. I told my companion we would have to dig a hole down in the snow and pile the big mail sacks around on the windy side to keep out the cold, and then take some boards I had in the sled and cut them up and make a fire. Those boards, you know, were our seats the day before, for we didn't have spring seats in those days. He was scared almost to death and said we would die. It stopped snowing about 5 minutes, and we saw a light quite a ways off. He wanted to wallow through the snow to where it was, but I told him we had better stay where we had blankets and robes. He said, "No, my God, we will die here." I said, "It will snow again in a few minutes, and we will not find any place. Still, to please him, I put the blankets and robes on the horses and fastened them on with the cursings and lines. As we started, it commenced to snow and blow, and we soon lost the light. We tried to follow our tracks back, but soon lost them. Now, my friend, I said, here is where we will sleep tonight in a good snowy bed. Yes, he said, and sometime next summer, our remains will be found here. I began digging a hole in the snow, for the wind was terribly cold. We got in there and pushed our feet under the snow. I tell you, we were somewhat tired and both fell asleep. How long we slept, I do not know, but the whole drifting full and onto my face woke me up. Being quite chilly, I crawled out and tried to get my companion up. He wanted me to leave him alone, saying he was tired and sleepy. I told him, get up. He was freezing, but he wouldn't do it. I grabbed hold of him and pulled him out, but he was not able to stand up. I jerked him around roughly, seeing as I had to, and he got angry. He told me afterwards he would have shot me if he had a gun.
Wow.
I got him limbered up, so to speak, and he could help himself. Making a ring around the hole, we ran about that until we got tired, and when they'd get into the hole and rest. As near as we could tell, it commenced sleeting about 3 o'clock, and our path got very icy. When daylight came, I saw the horses were on one hill and we were on the other. We were covered with ice, and so were the horses. Also, the harnesses were frozen in the ice, and one horse was stiff as a poker. Now, I presume that horse was dead. He doesn't specify if the horse is dead or not, but if you're as stiff as a poker, I presume you're dead. It was so cold and the snow froze so hard, we could drive any place and still not leave any tracks. We got to Veronica early in the morning. My passenger took a room in the Tremont house and was 5 weeks under the doctor's care before he could resume his journey. He said he owed me his life and would never forget me. He wrote the trip up for paper when he reached home and sent me a copy. That was my worst experience in this country. So that was Mr. Munson's account of the deep snow of 1856.
That's just amazing. Thank you.
I love how he wrote that up. It's like a story in a book.
Right. We're right there with him in his account. It's so great.
Very interesting. This next story is called The Tale of a Blizzard. And this is from 1902. Some of the early settlers in Vernon County didn't stay. They moved further west as the land became crowded. But they kept in touch with their families by letters. This letter was published in the Vernon County Censor on the 15th of January, 1902. It was from William Smith, formerly from Springville. He was writing to his brother James about a terrible winter storm he experienced in Nebraska, where he had moved. William, in his letter, narrates the tremendous effort it takes to save his livestock and how, as he works, the fate of his young sons out in the storm was constantly on his mind. So in William's own words, "This is the worst winter that I ever saw in my life, and the 12th was the worst day I ever experienced. The morning was as fine as you would wish to see. About 11 o'clock, it set in for one of the worst blizzards that had been for many years. In the 10 minutes from the time it commenced, one could not see a rod is 16 feet, to save his life. I came very near losing all my stock. They were within a few rods of the house, but it was impossible to drive them against the storm. and I had to put ropes on them and lead them to the barn one at a time. I was several hours doing it. Could only work a little while and then go to the fire and thaw out. My eyes would freeze up and the snow would freeze on my face, 3/4 of an inch thick. The cow's eyes were froze shut and they were as blind as bats. To cap the whole thing, the boys, James and George, were at school, excuse me, and Willie had gone for a load of wood 7 miles away. And I tell you, we were troubled concerning them, but could do nothing but sit in the house and try to think they were all right. I tell you, I did not sleep much that night, but as luck would have it, Willie could not make the horses face the storm and stopped at a house, and that is what saved him. The other boys stayed in the schoolhouse all night. One of our neighbors, a widow, was frozen to death. It is supposed she went out to drive in the cows and got lost. She was found 1.5 miles from home. I think we will hear more of that yet, for the weather has been cold and stormy, and there has not been much stir since the blizzard. There has been a lot of stock perished. It takes the best of the stable to protect stock here. I built one of sod with a 26-inch wall and covered with slow grass, and the snow would go through it. I have a huge log kitchen, 6-inch walls, all pointed good, and the snow will go through that too. It was all we could do to see out of the south windows, for the snow is almost up to the eaves. Yours truly, William. So that was A Tale of a Blizzard from 1902. The next story is pertinent to Vernon County and particularly to Viroqua. It's the ice storm on Groundhog's Day in 1922. So we just had Groundhog's Day. So this was in the Vernon County Censor, February 2nd, 1922. And what was so interesting to me is the reporter has a lot of anxiety as he's writing this, and he uses a lot of hyperbole to describe it. He said that there had been a similar storm in the 1880s, but there were no electric wires to come down. So that makes a lot of difference with electric storms. So here goes. The most disastrous ice storm which ever visited this section of the upper Mississippi Valley commenced Tuesday night and continued for about 24 hours. The storm opened Tuesday afternoon like a typical June thunderstorm, which does not occur once in a generation in February. In the evening, the temperature dropped to 32 degrees above, while the rain descended at times in torrents with lightning flashing and thunder rolling in approved summer style. Shortly after midnight, the high tension wire between here and Sparta gave way, was repaired, broke again, and the boys steamed up the plant. Viroqua awoke to find themselves gripped in a complete ice blanket, with ice-laden branches falling on every side, carrying down light and telephone wires by the score. Danger of electrocution from down wires forced suspension of light service shortly after daylight. The passing of the hours found the situation continually growing worse. The thunderstorm continued, the rain fell, the thermometer stuck at 32, and the ice blanket thickened. Giant limbs commenced to come down. The tops of the telephone and light poles toppled with their dozens of wires, and whole trees commenced to split open and crash down with mighty roars. The accumulation of the destructive period came as night fell, when the thermometer dropped a little, while the drizzle continued and a brisk wind sprang up. A steady cannonading resounded through the city as the twilight deepened into night, as black as the very sight of death. To venture out was folly. Morning dawned on as desolate a scene of destruction as Viroqua has witnessed since the cyclone of over half a century ago. Whole trees blocked many of the streets, and the rest were shattered wrecks. The noble trees along Jefferson Street and Rusk Avenue and in the city park, some which had taken near a century to grow, were mostly intact, but service wires were down everywhere, and the heavy poles and wires from Decker Street south to the normal school were lying in a tangled mass of wreckage. Over it all was the merciless blanket of ice topped with a few inches of snow. And then the reporter says, "The Storm King reigned supreme." The attempt to repair the telephone system or restore light service was futile. The ice coating and dropping temperatures made it impossible. The damage to wires is enormous. We doubt if 25,000 will cover the loss in Vernon County alone. Possibly twice that figure would be more correct. As an example of how hard hit the telephone companies were, Linman found that out of the 200 poles between Viroqua and Bud, only 40 were standing. So Bud's about 2.5 miles from Viroqua. It practically means the rebuilding of the telephone system in this county. It seems like pioneer days to be without telephone or light service. But a strange trick of the storm is that the valley damage is very slight. As you drop down in any of the valleys, feeble telephone lines are uninjured. A few degrees of higher temperature prevented the formation of ice. The very worst weather conditions have prevailed since the storm. Below zero part of the time, and the ice still covering trees and wires, making resumption of wire and light service a slow and difficult job. The trees, or whatever is left of them, are still bent down, and many will never resume their upright bearing when relieved of the ice burden. So you can tell the reporter is pretty despairing about what's going to happen to Viroqua, but they plant new trees and they put the wires up and it's fine. So, but when you're in the middle of it, it must seem like the end of the world. This next story is called The Armistice Day Storm. And this was written up for the State Historic Society by Jay Reed. So Jay Reed is considered a legendary outdoor writer for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And this will give you the background of the Armistice Storm. You've probably heard of it, especially if you listen to Larry Mueller on WPR, because he's always talking about the Armistice Storm. My daughter said to me once, all Larry Mueller talks about is turning the clocks back and the Armistice Storm. So those must be two of his favorite subjects. Anyway, so this is Jay Reed writing for the State Historical Society. It happened on a holiday. In 1940, November 11th was called Armistice Day. It was a day to honor the ending of World War I. At 11 o'clock in the morning on that day, school children all over the country stood in their classrooms. They faced east for a moment of silence. Banks and post offices closed, as did some factories and business places. We don't call it Armistice Day anymore. Instead, we call it Veterans Day. But in the history of violent storms, November 11th, 1940, will always be remembered as Armistice Day. It was the day that historians believe to be the worst, most disastrous storm ever to strike Wisconsin. By the time it was over, the storm had claimed more than 100 lives. It caused millions of dollars in damage. It was duck hunting season in Wisconsin when the killer storm struck. Now, somebody told me that many years ago, there was a lot more duck hunters. There's just not as many ducks nowadays. But apparently in 1940. A lot of people went duck hunting. It has been called the greatest hunting disaster in Northwest Wisconsin. Wind whipped over lakes, rivers, swamps, and other lowlands of the state. Hunters were in those places. Many were trapped in the storm. 39 hunters died. 20 of them were hunting on the Mississippi River between Wisconsin and Minnesota. The temperature dropped 45 degrees in 12 hours. It finally reached a low of 13 degrees above zero. Winds were nearly steady at from 45 to 55 miles per hour. How it all started. It was strangely warm for an early November, 58 degrees. Duck hunting in Wisconsin had not been good, but the wind began to kick up and the temperature began to drop. The day held the promise for good shooting. So the hunters went into the marshes. The ducks came. Hunting was indeed good, but then the full fury of the storm struck. Suddenly, the hunters were playing a bigger game. Their lives were at stake. Many of the hunters who had gone into the marshes on foot were able to get back. Some who had gone in boats saw a developing storm. They were able to leave in time, but hundreds of hunters misjudged the fury of the storm. Temperatures dropped quickly. The wind whipped the water so that outboard motors quickly became covered with ice. They would not start. Men were unable to row their boats against the wind. So deep were the waves that stumps were exposed. Boats that hit them turned over. Some survivors were able to start fires. They burned such wood as they could find. Finally, they burnt their boats. The wind tipped over trucks. The storm delayed trains. Railroad engineers said their locomotives labored, bucking south into the wind. The storm reached dramatic heights on Lake Michigan. Ships bobbed like toys on the waves. 80 men died. 60 were rescued. Bodies washed up on the Michigan shore all winter. So this is Glenn Florence's account. He was an extension agent in Trepalow County, later moving to Viroqua to work for the broadcaster. He had been hunting on the Mississippi River on that day in 1940 and gave this account to the broadcaster in 1989. I went hunting that weekend with 3 friends in the Trepalow Marsh. Even though it was bluebird weather, warm and poor for hunting, on Saturday I wore my wool deer hunting clothes and my friends laughed at me. He claimed it was a Canadian weather report, which he said is never over 2 days off, that caused him to prepare for cold weather. He added that while his friends were in shorts, he was perspiring in wool clothes. We walked from high ground into the marsh and had to jump shoot to get the ducks up. My friend suggested we go further north to Alma City to get my boat and hunt up there. But I told him if the ducks aren't flying here, they're not flying there either. In looking back, Glenn felt that wearing his winter clothes and not getting his boat is what saved his life. About 2 p.m., the wind picked up and the temperature was dropping. Thousands of seagulls were circling overhead and the ducks were trying to get out of the wind. My friends were cold, so they went to the car, but I stayed. I had cold hands and the wind was harsh on my face, but I wanted to shoot my limit. The water was freezing. I shot a duck and the wind took it away. I bet it landed a mile away. So Glenn finished hunting about 4 and went to the car. I took my hunting coat off when I got to shore and set it alongside the car. It stood right up and didn't even fall over. By that time, it was snowing like all get out. It took him and his friends 4 hours to drive the 30 miles home. The next day, stories started pouring in about the many people caught out in the storm that had died. Glenn recalled seeing a boat in the water with 3 men inside, later learning that the father in the middle had froze to death, but his sons on either side had lived. He also recalled hearing about 3 men, one a close friend, who were trying to reach Ferryville with an aluminum canoe. His friend was found froze to death along the railroad track, paddle in hand. One of the other men was not found until spring near Prairie. Other hunters stayed alive by hugging their dogs. After that storm, Glenn sold his boat and motor and hunted from shore. I never felt safe after that. Now I just walk into the water and hunt. It's a lot safer. And the next account is from Don Arson. He's a former highwayman for Vernon County. And he told the broadcaster that him and 4 others were in a duck blind along the backwaters near Stoddard. It started about 1 o'clock. I could feel them, the ice crystals, stinging my eyeballs because I was facing into the wind. The wind was really blowing and even blew our blind away. I pulled the motorboat out and we got under it. The men talked about spending the night under the boat, but I talked them out of it. If I hadn't, they would have never made it. I have been out in bad storms, but this was by far the worst storm I had ever gone through in the river bottom. That's the Armistice Storm. My final story is from Kathleen Hendon Davis, who was 9 years old when she experienced this storm. And all winter storms can't be judged the same. It depends if you're wanting to get snowed in or if you're wanting to leave. So she gave this lighthearted account to the broadcaster many years after the storm. It was New Year's Eve, and there was to be a house party at the John Wedwick farm. So even though a blizzard was in motion, my sister, Gwen, and I, then about 8 and 9, begged our parents to go. We knew the fathers would play cards, the mothers would serve good food, the children would make fudge and popcorn and play rook. We couldn't miss all that. It was 6:30 p.m. and dark. Daddy was insisting the heavy snow coming down was really nothing to worry about, while Mother was quietly suggesting it was colder than cold usually is and would get stuck in the snow. But Daddy persisted. Get ready, girls. Put on your warm clothes. I am going out to the garage with this tea kettle of boiling water for the radiator, and I'll bet your life the Chrysler will turn over and we'll go. Mother reluctantly went to the medicine cabinet in the kitchen and removed her box of W.T. Raleigh pink pale face powder and small compact of Raleigh's pink rouge. Mother didn't wear lipstick, so there wasn't any of that in the medicine cabinet. In fact, there wasn't any medicine in the medicine cabinet except for Raleigh's medicated ointment and Raleigh's mouthwash, which cured everything that we ever had in our family. After Mother smoothed her powder puff over her pretty face, she dipped it into the powder box once more, folded the puff, wrapped it in her well-pressed linen handkerchief, and put it in her purse. Gwen and I were excited. We pulled on our heavy coats and hats, scarves, and boots. Gwen and I ran for the front door, and Mother followed with Bonnie, who was about 4 years old. After locking the door with our skeleton key, Mother hid it where we always hid it, in the electric meter box high on the front porch wall. Into the back seat, Gwen, Bonnie, and I piled, pulling our red fur robe across our lap. Here lies Grandpa's bossy, lined with brown wool. Mother wrapped up her brown and white plaid wool blanket around her shoulders, but Daddy's sheepskin coat was enough for him. Let's go, he said. The Chrysler coughed a little as we backed out of the driveway, but once in low gear and moving forward, she drove smoothly west on Church Street, right on Main, left on Broadway, and onto a few blocks to Highway 56. At that corner, Mother looked at Mrs. Beck's house and said, I'm afraid Mrs. Beck's poor goats are cold tonight. And look at the snow, so heavy coming down, you can't hardly see the lights in the house. As we drove on through the dark countryside, we could barely see the highway. It was full of snow with heavy white sheets still pouring down. 5 miles or so west of Roqua, the only indication we even had that we were on a road were the rows of fence posts on either side of the car. Finally, we came to the last turnoff to the north before reaching the Bud store and the Elper Thompson Hill. Halfway up the hill, the Chrysler's back wheels started to spin and we stopped. Before Daddy resorted to putting chains on, however, he hurried Gwen and me out of the car to help him push and asked Mother to take over the steering. We had met this type of car crisis with Daddy 100 times, through snow, through mud, and once through part of the Mississippi River when it ran over the road at Romance on one of our Genoa fishing trips. But that night the Chrysler was too much to move and Daddy attached the chains. Up the hill we crawled, and soon we saw the Wedwick's yard light, a welcome sight with the white snow glittering and blowing in circles. We were in high gear now. Daddy pushed the accelerator to the floor and we slammed up the driveway, missing the ditches on either side of the culvert. Unloading were 2 sleds full of cold but yipping cousins who had come on another road. The men unhitched the horses, found stalls for them in the Wedwick barn, fed them the Wedwick's hay, drained the Chrysler's radiator, and joined the party inside. We were the Louis Olsons, the Carl Hendons, the Tony Hendons, the Wedwicks, and us, the Ben Hendons, all cousins not long from Norway. Soon the fathers were laughing and sometimes slapping the table with their fist as they played 500 and argued politics. Everybody versus Daddy, as he was the only progressive in the crowd. Religion was not a controversial subject, as there were 28 baptized and those older than 14 confirmed Lutherans in the house. The mothers prepared a lunch of ground chicken sandwiches piled high in a dish pan lined with white tea towels, lefse, potato salad, jello, pickles, cheeses, rosettes, cakes, luscious cherry and apple pies, and a gallon of hot coffee waited on the stove. After lunch, the children stacked chairs in the dining room for dancing on the linoleum. Then the fathers proceeded to the piano, violin, and harmonica. Daddy played the piano by ear, chording mostly, a contrast to Mother, who played strictly by note, preferring Mozart, World War II songs, which Daddy had courted Mother with, and Lutheran hymns. But we preferred the jazz flowing from Daddy's piano, as did the dancers filling the dining room. Everyone, including the children, waltzed or tried to. Finally, the youngest children dozed off in chairs and were carried gently into the downstairs bedroom where the guest coats were piled on a large bed and a sofa bed, and they drifted off to a warm, sweet sleep. At midnight, everyone paused to say Happy New Year and thank the Wedwicks for a nice party. Then someone turned on the yard light and looked out the window. There was a white field out there, and it was 36 inches deep on the porch floor. So the party went on all night, slowing down as the hours passed. All the children managed to sleep somewhere in that large modern house, while the parents dozed in chairs until dawn. We children awakened refreshed on New Year's morning, a beautiful clear day to see no fence post anywhere, no sleds, and a white hump where the Chrysler had been. The fathers hustled around, shoveling a path to the barn and chicken house so they could feed and milk the cows and give the guest horses more of the Wedwick's hay and oats. Then Carl, Tony, and Louis stomped out across the fields in the general direction of their farms, and Daddy headed for Elper Thompson Hill and Highway 56. He was hoping to get home and refill the coal heater before the water pipes froze. The snow was too deep for sleds or games of any kind, so we made fudge and popcorn. There was plenty of food for all these people because Mrs. Wedwick, like Mother and the other ladies, had at least 500 quarts of home canned meats, fruits, and vegetables. And out in the chicken coop, there were plenty of chickens just in case. All the mothers and children slept over again that night with the Wedwicks. The next morning, now January 2nd, we children nearly cried when a big orange Vernon County snowplow with a V-shaped blade 50 feet high slowly churned its way down the road past the Wedwick farm. The party was over. The fathers returned about 3 p.m. that afternoon. Mr. Wedwick and his sons, Wilmer and Norman, had shoveled an opening through the driveway and out into the road, so that finally all the people, the horses, the Chrysler, and the sleds could get out of Mrs. Wedwick's life and go home. Years later, when discussing this party, some of the cousins said it lasted 3 days. Others said it went on for 5. But to Mrs. Wedwick, it must have seemed like a lifetime.
All right. How about a round of applause for our presenter today, Miss Veronica Kleiber?
Oh, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, Veronica. That was absolutely fantastic to listen to these historical stories. Thank you so much for curating them for us.
And they're all first-person accounts, so they're in the individual's own words, which is, I think, is really special to hear how they describe it.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. I went ahead and took some notes here, and maybe we want to move into a question and answer type segment. I took the notes because as I enjoy really listening to the history and these historical memories, I also want to exercise my own short-term memory. So perhaps I could go over some of the notes and we could maybe lead into some conversations and just keep this really interesting program rolling here. So what caught my attention in your story from 1856 was that they were traveling by stagecoach and that the stagecoach was running between Viroqua and La Crosse. Is that right?
Yes.
It's just very fascinating to me to hear such a historical account. And
so,
also,
so Lacey, do you know where the Eddie Lynn farm is?
I'm familiar, yes.
So on the far side of that, you can actually see where the stagecoach line ran.
Is that right?
And I know that some interested people would like to make it into a bike trail or something. It's just beautiful, but there's a steep drop off, which I think is the clincher because it would have to be fenced all the way. But you can see the iron bolts that were sunk into the cement, and there's still wire cords going, and that's where the stagecoach line had gone. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's so fascinating that we can see that even
There's
still
still
today.
artifacts.
Yeah, that's amazing. You also mentioned in that story the Tremont House. Why does that sound so familiar to me?
And you'll have to tell me because I don't know.
It must be a hotel in La Crosse, I think. Something
well,
like
let's
that.
see.
Tremont?
I know they were in Viroqua. So, and it's called the Tremont House.
Yeah.
So it must have preceded the Fortney Hotel.
Okay, that could be it.
I never thought to look it up.
Well, you know, that could be it because we also have a historical photographic essay video on the Fortney Hotel that we did with the Vernon Historical Society. So they probably mentioned it in that video.
Yeah, I saw that. It was excellent. It was an excellent video. Yeah, yes. So they were back in Viroqua and he called it, my passenger took a room in the Tremont House. So.
That's great. in the story that you retold of the tale of the blizzard from 1902, I really thought it was so interesting to hear a measurement of 16 feet referred to as a rod. Now, I don't know if anybody else who's watching has ever heard of that measurement before, but that was something that I learned from that story as well.
But don't you think it's because these are immigrants now, and I don't know when they started using the metric system in Europe, but I presume they never used the system we use. So when they immigrated, I would guess they were used to the metric system.
Absolutely. That is a very good point. Um, Sadly, I wrote down that the cow's eyes were freezing shut. And I know you and your husband, Veronica, have been farmers for a very long time. And I was just really surprised and to hear that could happen to cows, but I'd imagine that is possible, especially if they get caught out in a really bad storm.
Yeah, I suppose nowadays cattle are seldom. Our cattle always have a place to get in out of the storm. You remember the Little House books? Lacey,
Absolutely.
where, in one of the episodes, the cows' heads actually freeze to the ground.
Oh my.
So it might be a little different out west. I mean, it's flat and the wind blows steady. So I just always remember that the cows, Pa had to go out and break the cow's nose from the ground. So.
Yeah. Yeah. We have those books available here at the McIntosh Memorial Library. Those Little House on the Prairie books.
Yeah, even adults can read those. Those are
Absolutely, most certainly. In the next story, the Vernon County ice storm that happened on Groundhog's Day in 1922. I also noticed that the author of that article was using the term ice blanket pretty repetitively. I'm not sure if I've ever experienced an ice blanket, but I don't think I'd like to after hearing what a mess that uh, late or winter rain thunderstorm ice storm created for Viroqua.
You know, the Amish have a saying, you never want to hear thunder over bare woods. And I suppose that must mean that when you have a thunderstorm in the winter, it's going to be an ice storm. And the temperatures have to be perfect. And I know Wisconsin has experienced a couple ice storms. I'm not sure of the dates, but yeah, it's a miserable thing. The temperatures are at freezing and it's raining, and
yeah, that sounds really dangerous. And
nowadays we have our cell phones, don't we? We're not nearly so cut off. Farmers particularly are affected if the power goes out. But and it's still, you're still without power sometimes for a couple days, but it's rare. The power company does a really good job of realizing the farmers can't milk without their electricity, and so it's very seldom that the farms go very long without power, but it still happens occasionally.
Yeah, and talk about being caught off guard with some of that. Definitely in the Armistice Day Storm, that you read 3 different accounts of that storm, and it sounded like quite a few people were caught off guard for that storm in 1940. And what a massive storm, what a big storm system that must have been, because those accounts were coming not only from Vernon County, but also over in Milwaukee. And that storm really made quite an effect. Pretty tragic to lose over 100 lives, and a lot of those lost in Lake Michigan. And then to hear of those like electrocutions that were happening, just things that you wouldn't think about in winter storms, but it seems like that was really a whopper.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll have to tune in next year on Veterans Day and listen to Larry Mueller's account of it, Lacey.
Yeah, well, I'm interested, so that's a good tip. Yeah, that storm is really fascinating. But then also, I think I missed the year of Kathleen's story, the last
Okay,
story,
1931.
1931.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed hearing this story.
She's quite the writer, isn't she?
Yeah.
I loved her tongue-in-cheek reference to everyone was eating the horses were eating the Wedwick's hay.
Yeah.
The horses were eating the Wedwick's oats.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought that was really funny. So
I
she
did
had quite the sense of humor she had. So.
I did too. And I thought that the way she described her experience of this particular winter storm really let me in to using my imagination, for the reason that she was so descriptive in saying,
Yeah. Excellent recounting.
Definitely how the makeup that her mother was using was the Raleigh's brand. And
I think I got the impression her mother must have sold it. So,
okay.
you know, just like years ago, people sold Motkins. That's what I thought her mother probably used Raleigh's because she sold it. So,
okay, that made sense. And then that makes a lot of sense. And then how she was describing how her father was heating up water to pour into the radiator. That's something I would never have thought of as like preparation to go to a party. But
did you notice, Lacey, how she refers to their car as a Chrysler?
Yes.
And her cousins still have horses. So I think probably back in the 30s to have a car was a big deal. And it was the Chrysler. It wasn't the car, it was a Chrysler.
Yeah.
And they had to drain the they had to drain the radiator at night so it wouldn't freeze. Yeah. So yeah, it's a whole different world nowadays with our modern cars. I mean, how often do you worry that you can't get your car started? You know, not very often. Most cars sit in garages, and yeah, so it's
absolutely
a whole different world nowadays.
Yeah, I would think that some people who are watching this from home or even in attendance right now can maybe even think of some Chrysler make and models that are from that time period, especially if they're familiar with that era. So I thought that was really interesting. You know, she mentioned that Bud had a store, and I'm curious if that original building is still standing. Do you know?
It is, Lacey. It was a store 30 years ago when we moved here, and it was a grocery store. And the owner said it was Mr. Triggerstad owned it, and at that time, and he said when the bread truck stopped coming, then that's when they closed the store.
Oh.
So because you have to get people would stop in for fresh bread, and so when they couldn't get fresh bread every day, then they had no reason to keep the store. So it sat empty for a couple of years, and then some young men bought it, and they cut off part of it. So the part that's still there is still part of the store. They remodeled it. So and so now it's a nice house for some young men.
Okay, great. That's good to know. It's interesting the historical building or a portion of it is still standing today.
Yeah, because, you know, years ago when Wisconsin was full of little farms, then there was a cheese factory every 10 miles because they figured that's how long the farmers could deliver the milk with horses and milk cans, and the cheese factory had to be close enough so the farmer could deliver the milk and it would stay good. And so that's why you found every 10 miles or so, you found a cheese factory. And so that's what Bud was. And the cheese factory is still there also. Lacey, I don't know if you've gone past there lately, but the cheese factory is now, the gentleman who owns it repairs automobiles.
Okay.
And
Okay.
judging from his parking lot, it's always full of cars waiting to get repaired. So I think he does a really nice business there. So yeah, so the cheese factory is still there too.
All right. Well, I will have to make the 2.5-mile drive out to Bud to
Yeah, next
check
time
it
you go,
out.
next time you go to La Crosse, you'll have to go that way.
Absolutely. I'd like to have a look. And speaking of that, bread and cheese, following up with Kathleen's story here, I really thought that the cuisine that was presented at their 3-day, 2-night-long New Year's Eve party sounded really delicious. And also, I felt like it was really interesting to hear about the music selections that they were enjoying. I've always had a unanswered curiosity about what local Baroqueans have enjoyed as far as musical tastes. And she mentioned that it was pretty varied from classical to waltz and Lutheran hymns, but also jazz. So I was really appreciative to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I've always heard that Norwegians are very musical.
Mhm.
And she mentions they're all cousins recently from Norway. And it sounds like they could all play an instrument, huh?
Yeah, definitely. I bet they made the most out of those 2 nights that they were all snowed in together. And something else, and this is a little bit off subject, but comes from Kathleen's story, is she mentioned that all of their coats were piled up on a bed. And I know that whenever I've gone to family gatherings here in the wintertime, all of our coats end up being piled up high on a bed. So
And
I
they
don't,
and they put the baby right in the middle of the pile.
right.
If you're unfortunate to have the coat the baby's lying on and it's damp, you know why it's damp.
That's it. That's exactly it.
But what a nice soft spot for the baby.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for the wonderful recountings of these winter storms and how the timing couldn't have been, any more perfect because we got about, was it 9 inches of snow yesterday?
Yeah, we just had our own storm, huh?
We did. Yes. So definitely really snowy and blowy out there. A bit of ice on the roads yet. So we hope that everyone out there is staying safe and enjoying the snowfall now. It'd be a good time to make some snowmen and just enjoy some snuggled in time. Thank you. Thank you again, Veronica, so much. We really appreciate you being here today. And I just want to mention that this program is brought to us with support from the Bader Philanthropies Group.